Hi, it's Dr. Ogden, and we're going to now look at a lecture concerning intelligent design creationism. So this is a topic that I think is important within the context of evolution, and particularly with why it's important to teach evolution in the public schools, especially at the high school level and at the university level. And so what we're going to do is look at a brief history about the ideas of creationism and intelligent design, and what different legal cases have said about these cases as well. So to start off with, back in 1925, you may recall, and if not, go and look up, the Scopes trial, which was this trial concerning a high school teacher who taught a little bit of evolution in a class, and it was against the law to teach evolution. And that case basically had a chilling effect across the United States, where many states adopted similar anti-evolution laws. And it wasn't until 1968 that in Arkansas, a high school teacher by the last name of Epperson, figured here in the picture, said that thought that it was not correct, that she could not teach evolution, and so she actually brought up a case against the state of Arkansas, and she actually won. And the way that she won was really not that difficult. The lawyers could basically argue that it's unconstitutional to not allow her to teach evolution because, and if you hear, because it selects from the body of knowledge of a particular segment which it prescribes for the sole reason that it is deemed to be in conflict with a particular religious doctrine. So that was the main reason in the 1968 case. Now, what this brings up then is what are, of course, the courts looking at, and the courts are looking at the First Amendment for the most part, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercises thereof. So in my words, I like to think of it this way, that public institutions must be religiously neutral, right? They can't advocate any particular religious doctrine especially in the science high school science public classroom or any public science classroom. So the first thing, though, that we learn is that the Supreme Court says you cannot ban the teaching of evolution. So quickly, some of the anti-evolution opponents came up with an idea. They said, okay, well, let's call a new type of way of studying about creation. We'll call it creation science, and even some textbooks were written about this. Well, not too long after, in Arkansas, once again, there's a court case that happens, and basically they listen to some really famous biologists and some other people, and the verdict basically says that since creation science is not science, it was demonstrated very clearly during this case that creation science was not science, so therefore the conclusion is that it cannot then be taught in the high school science public classroom. Now, basically the same case was also happening right next door in Louisiana, and this case actually did go to the Supreme Court, and so it's the Edwards v. Aguillard case, which we point to as the main case that says that the church and state, right, must be, in a sense, separated, or in other words, you can't advocate religion or religious ideas in the public science classroom. So some people ask, well, what about intelligent design, this new idea that's coming out? Well, it turns out that intelligent design is not exactly equal to creationism, but in most respects it is. There are some things in intelligent design that are not part of creationism. For example, age of the earth. Intelligent design proponents do not require that the age of the earth be, 6,000 years or just a few thousand years. They allow for a really old earth. Other things they allow for are evolution within a population, but that population never evolves into a separate species. So kind of this microevolutionary processes. And again, there's actually quite a broad range of intelligent design proponents, and sometimes they also stand at different ground and defend intelligent design in different ways. But that's kind of a nice way to just think about intelligent design. So it turns out in Dover, Pennsylvania, there was a school board that decided that students should be made aware of gaps and problems in Darwin's theory and other theories of evolution, including, but not limited to, intelligent design. So the idea was, let's get intelligent design as an alternative, and then some textbooks that were written by intelligent design proponents were placed into the library, and students were directed that they could go there. And so basically this is voted in by the school board in Dover, Pennsylvania. And this is in 2004, and then eventually a suit happens, and the parents sue the school over intelligent design about doing this. And the first parent, last name of the parent was Kitzmiller, and I think there were like 10 or 11 others. And then a judge is chosen, and the judge that was chosen was Judge Jones, who at the time, was basically he was a President George Bush appointee, kind of a conservative Christian, and for the most part, the intelligent design crowd was really happy with this selection that occurred. But as good judges do, he listens to the evidence, and so he brought in, or each of the plaintiffs and the defendants brought in their best witnesses, and the judge listened to all the sides, and at the very end he gave his decision, which was, I've just encapsulated a few of the quotes, but a wonderful decision. If you ever want to read something really interesting about this, go and read his decision. But it says, the evidence at trial demonstrates that ID is nothing less than the progeny of creationism. The overwhelming evidence at trial establishes that ID is a religious view, a mere relabeling of creationism and not a scientific theory. And so therefore, we have concluded today that it is not, moreover, that ID cannot uncouple itself from its creationist and thus religious antecedents. So, in other words, he establishes very clearly, it was established for him, and then he said that ID is simply creationism. So, it's the same thing. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough that basically then he can rely upon the Supreme Court decision from Edwards v. Aguillard and just basically say it's unconstitutional to teach ID as an alternative to evolution in a public school science classroom. Now, one of the main pieces of evidence that helped the judge make this decision was exactly this textbook that was placed in the libraries called Of Pandas and People. And so the plaintiffs went in and summoned all of the different versions of this textbook, and so here they are listed across the bottom. What was interesting is they went in and actually looked at the words creation and intelligent design, and they saw that up to the Pandas 1987 version 1, you saw lots of creationists or versions of that word, and very little intelligent design. And then right at that year, you see almost a flip-flop where now everything becomes intelligent design, and everything that is creation drops out. Well, recall that 1987, Edwards v. Aguillard occurred right then, and so they basically did a copy and replace. And here's a couple examples of this. Creation means that various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator, and so forth. This is the 1987 version 1. Here's the version 2. Same thing, but just intelligent design means that. Blah, 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 blah. So just a simple copy and find and replace is what they were doing. One of the times there was an actual creationist that was in version 1. What should have happened was probably design proponent in version 2, but it ended up being C design proponentist. So it was like the ultimate smoking gun or missing link, pun intended. So the point is, though, that any idea, whether it's intelligent design or any other idea in science, it doesn't really matter. Any idea that ever comes forward that's new must go through this process. It's a novel scientific claim, then research is done on it, then peer review is performed on all of the research, and if it is a good idea and enough studies have concluded the same thing, and if more and more evidence is mounted to support the idea, the novel scientific claim, then it becomes scientific consensus. And at that point, it should be put into textbooks and into classrooms, particularly at the high school level, because we don't want high school level kids trying to look at every single new novel scientific claim. We should give them more of a filtered version of what we think, how the world works. So if intelligent design were to go through this process, then I would be the first one to also say, hey, yeah, it ought to be in the textbook and it ought to be in the classroom. Unfortunately, basically intelligent design has never had any novel research done. No peer review then of any of that. It is definitely not scientific consensus. There's a few fringe scientists perhaps that support this idea, but it is definitely not scientific consensus, and so therefore it has no place in the classroom or textbook. Rather, the strategy has always been to get school boards or back end this into the classroom, but not through scientific inquiry. So basically, you can't ban evolution in the public science classroom. You can't require equal time for creationism. You can't teach creationism on your own. So if you're a biology professor or teacher out there somewhere in a small school, in the countryside. You cannot do this on your own either. You can't teach intelligent design. I have an asterisk here because unfortunately the Dover, Pennsylvania case did not go to the Supreme Court. So it's technically not a federal law yet, but for the most part, I don't think anyone's going to try to do this again, because the intelligent design camp just got slaughtered in that case. So you can't teach non-scientific arguments against evolution. You can teach about religion. Like, for example, it's okay to mention God if students are having questions about how does God and religion fit in. A teacher could address those questions, but you cannot advocate any particular religion. It doesn't matter if you love the Navajo story of creation where a great wolf vomits up the diversity of life or whatever. You can't advocate that. You cannot advocate, but you could address these questions with your students. And of course, you can teach about evolution and should.